They thought I was asleep, but every word they said broke my heart. I stayed perfectly still. Even my breathing felt too loud. My hands were folded in my lap, trembling, but I didn't move. If I moved, they would stop talking. And somehow, I already knew I needed to hear everything. My son's voice came first. The same voice that once called for me in the middle of the night when he had bad dreams. Now it sounded low, careful. "We can't keep doing this forever," he said. Someone laughed softly. My daughter-in-law. "She doesn't even notice half of what's going on," she said. "Most of the time she's asleep anyway." A sharp pain went through my chest. I had been awake the whole time. I was always awake, listening, remembering. My son sighed. "We just need a plan. The doctor said she's getting worse." We could say the nursing home is safer. Nursing home. The word echoed in my head like a door slamming shut. "And the house?" my daughter-in-law asked. "Once she's settled, we can sell it. Prices are good right now." Sell it. That house was built with my husband's hands. Every wall held a memory. Birthdays, tears, laughter. The night I held him as he took his last breath. My fingers dug into my sweater to keep from crying out. "She won't fight it," my daughter-in-law continued. "She trusts you. She always signs whatever you put in front of her." There was a pause. In that silence, I waited for my son to defend me, to say something, anything. He didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "Let's just be careful. We don't want problems later." Problems. That's what I had become. I felt something warm slide down my cheek. I turned my face slightly toward the wall so they wouldn't see if they walked past. I remembered holding my son's tiny fingers, promising him I would always protect him. I had kept that promise my whole life. He had forgotten his. They kept talking about paperwork, money, timing, but the words started to blur together. My heart was pounding too loudly in my ears. I was no longer just hurt. I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. They thought I was weak. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I was already gone. But as I sat there in silence, something inside me hardened. Beneath the pain, beneath the betrayal, there was a quiet strength they had forgotten I had. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry out. I simply listened. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment in a person's life is the moment they stop being invisible. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, the soft ticking of the clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the familiar creak of old wood settling. This house had always spoken to me. It knew my footsteps, my grief, my prayers, and now it felt like it was waiting, just like I was. By morning, my eyes were swollen, but my mind was clear. At breakfast, they acted normal. Too normal. My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly as she placed a cup of tea in front of me, the way she always did when other people were watching. "Did you sleep well, Mom?" she asked, her voice dripping with kindness. I nodded slowly. "Like a baby," I said. She exchanged a glance with my son, a quick one, the kind they thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed everything now. Over the next few days, I watched them the way they had watched me for years, quietly, carefully. I noticed how conversations stopped when I entered the room, how papers disappeared from the table when I came close, how my daughter-in-law spoke louder and slower to me, as if volume could replace respect. "You should rest more," she'd say. You don't need to worry about these things anymore. We'll take care of everything. Everything. One afternoon, while they were out, I went into the small closet at the end of the hallway. At the very back, behind old coats and a box of winter shoes, was a metal tin. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years, deeds, letters, and the will my husband and I had prepared long ago. The house was still in my name. Always had been. I sat down on the floor, the papers spread around me, and for the first time since that night, I cried freely. Not just from pain, but from relief. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was before age bent my back and grief slowed my steps. I wasn't finished yet. The following week, my son told me we were going out to dinner. A special dinner, he said. Just family. I smiled to myself. The restaurant was quiet and warm, the kind of place meant for celebrations. My daughter-in-law ordered for everyone, as usual. She talked about the future, vacations, renovations, plans that didn't include me. Finally, she leaned forward and took my hand. "Mom," she said gently, "we've been thinking about what's best for you." There it was. My son cleared his throat. "We think a care facility might be safer. You know, more support." I looked at their faces, the rehearsed concern, the practiced patience. I set my napkin down slowly. "I heard you," I said. Silence fell across the table like a dropped glass. "I heard you that night in the hallway," I continued, my voice steady. Every word. About the nursing home. About selling my house. About me not noticing. My daughter-in-law's smile vanished. My son's face drained of color. You were awake?" he whispered. "I've been awake for a long time," I replied. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. "You spoke about me like I was already dead, like I was a problem to be solved." My son's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I raised my hand. Let me finish." I reached into my bag and placed the documents on the table. The house is mine. It has always been mine, and it will remain mine. My daughter-in-law stared at the papers as if they might bite her. That's not what we thought." "I know," I said softly. "That's the problem." People at nearby tables glanced over, sensing the tension. I didn't care. For years, I had made myself small to keep the peace. I was done. "I trusted you," I said to my son, my voice breaking at last. "I gave you everything, and you repaid me by planning my life behind my back." He started crying then. Real crying. The kind that comes too late. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know," I replied, "but you did." I stood up slowly. "I won't be moving into a nursing home. And I won't be signing anything without my lawyer present. From now on, my decisions are mine." We didn't finish dinner. That night, back in my room, I packed a small bag. Just essentials. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming space. The next morning, I moved into a small apartment near the park. A place filled with light and quiet, and the sound of children playing outside. My son called every day at first. I didn't answer. Eventually I did. We talk now, carefully. Healing takes time. Some wounds never fully close. As for my daughter-in-law, she stopped calling altogether. And that's okay. Because I learned something important in that hallway, listening in silence. Growing old doesn't mean losing your voice. Being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. And sometimes, the moment they think you can no longer hear is the moment you finally listen to the truth. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner when I moved in. It was small. One bedroom, one window facing the park. But it was mine. No whispered conversations behind closed doors. No careful watching of my hands to see if they were steady enough to sign something. Just quiet. Honest, peaceful quiet. The first night, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. No ticking clock from the hallway. No television murmuring arguments I wasn't meant to hear. No footsteps stopping when I entered a room. I slept better than I had in years. The mornings became my favorite. Sunlight spilled across the floor, warming my feet as I made tea. Children laughed outside, their voices floating up through the open window. Sometimes I stood there longer than necessary, just watching life move forward, reminding myself that I was still part of it. Not everyone understood my decision. You should be with family, a distant relative told me on the phone. At your age, being alone is dangerous, another warned. They didn't understand that loneliness isn't about being alone. Loneliness is sitting in a house full of people who have already erased you. A week after I moved in, there was a knock at my door. It was my son. He looked smaller somehow, older. The confidence he used to carry so easily had been replaced with hesitation. He held a paper bag in his hands. "I brought your favorite bread," he said quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the small kitchen table. He didn't rush to speak this time. He waited. I appreciated that. "I've been thinking about everything," he finally said. "About what you said at dinner. About who I became." I looked at him, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man who had almost lost his way. "I let myself be led," he continued. "I chose comfort over courage, and I'm ashamed." Tears slid down his face. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. "I don't know if you can forgive me," he said, "but I want to do better." I reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were still warm, still familiar. "Forgiveness isn't a switch," I said softly. "It's a process." He nodded. "I'll wait." And for the first time, I believed him. Days turned into weeks. I built a routine. Morning walks in the park. Lunch at the corner cafe, where the waitress learned my name. Evenings spent reading by the window. I started attending a community center nearby. Art classes, book clubs, conversations with people who didn't see me as a burden, but as a story worth hearing. One afternoon, a woman named Clara sat beside me during a painting class. "You have steady hands," she said, smiling. I laughed. "You should have seen them a few months ago." We talked about life, about loss, about starting over when you thought all the beginnings were behind you. By the end of the class, we were friends. It surprised me how much life was still waiting. Not everything was easy. Some nights, memories crept in. The hallway, the laughter, the silence where my son's defense should have been. On those nights, I let myself cry. I didn't push the pain away anymore. I sat with it until it loosened its grip. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. Months later, my son invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. No hidden agendas. No papers. Just soup and conversation. "I've started counseling," he told me, trying to understand why I stayed quiet when it mattered. I nodded. Silence can be a habit. It takes work to unlearn. He smiled sadly. You taught me to stand up for myself. I forgot that lesson. No, I said. You just misplaced it. We talked about boundaries, about respect, about what our relationship could look like moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As for my daughter-in-law, time created distance where words never could. She sent one message, short, polite, careful. I replied with the same. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They just don't need to be crossed again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the park in gold, I sat by my window and reflected on the woman I had been in that hallway. Small, quiet, afraid to breathe too loudly, and the woman I was now. Still quiet, but not small. Still gentle, but no longer afraid. I realized something then. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it walks away to save itself. I picked up my phone and recorded a short voice message, not for my family, but for myself. Remember this, I said. You survived betrayal. You chose yourself. And you are still here. I played it back once. Then I smiled. That night, as the park lights flickered on and laughter echoed below, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on other people behaving well. The solid kind. The kind you build yourself. They hadn't known I was listening. But in the end, it was listening that gave me my life back. A year passed without me noticing. Life has a way of doing that, when it finally feels like your own. The seasons changed outside my window. Spring blossoms giving way to summer laughter. Then falling leaves drifting like slow goodbyes. Each season left something behind in me too. Peeling away old fear and replacing it with something steadier. I no longer jumped at the sound of raised voices. I no longer rehearsed explanations in my head before speaking. I no longer shrank myself to make room for others. The woman in the hallway felt like a lifetime ago. On my birthday, I woke to sunlight and birdsong. 90 years old. The number sounded heavy, but my heart felt lighter than it had in decades. I made myself breakfast and sat by the window, thinking of my husband. Of how he used to kiss my forehead every year and say, "Still the strongest woman I know." I smiled. Later that morning, my phone rang. My son. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said. His voice was different now, steady, present. "Thank you," I replied. "I was hoping maybe we could celebrate. Just lunch. If you want." I paused, not because I was afraid, but because I had learned to choose carefully. "I'd like that," I said. We met at the same small cafe I often visited. He arrived early, standing when he saw me, pulling out my chair the way his father used to. It wasn't a performance. It was respect. Over soup and bread, he handed me a small envelope. "I wrote you something," he said. "No expectations. You don't even have to read it now." I slipped it into my purse. "I will," I said. "Later." We talked about simple things. The weather, books, the park. He didn't rush. He didn't interrupt. He listened. That mattered more than any apology. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Long, careful, honest. He wrote about regret. Real regret. Not the kind meant to soften consequences. He wrote about realizing how easily love can be overshadowed by convenience. How silence can turn into betrayal without a single cruel word being spoken. And he wrote this. "I thought strength looked loud and confident. I was wrong. You taught me that strength can be quiet, patient, and still unbreakable. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. I cried, but not from pain this time, from release. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't erase the past. It simply frees the future from being chained to it. Not long after, something unexpected happened. The community center asked if I would speak at one of their gatherings. Just tell your story, they said. However you want. I almost said no. Old habits whispered. Who would want to listen? But I remembered the hallway. I remembered what staying silent had cost me. So I said yes. The room was small. Folding chairs. A handful of faces. Some young, some old, some tired in ways I recognized too well. I told them about love, about betrayal, about listening when you aren't meant to. I didn't name names. I didn't seek sympathy. I spoke about boundaries, about dignity, about how age doesn't strip you of your right to choose. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a woman in the front row stood up. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said. I thought I was the only one. After that, more people spoke. Stories spilled out of being ignored, dismissed, controlled under the mask of care. We listened to one another. Truly listened. I went home that night feeling taller. Weeks later, a letter arrived from my daughter-in-law. It was brief. She wrote that she had been angry at life, at responsibility, at aging itself. That she had taken that anger out on me because I was quiet and close and easy to overlook. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply acknowledged the harm. I read it once, then again. I didn't respond right away. Some silences are no longer fear. Some silences are choice. Eventually, I sent a short reply. Calm, kind, firm. I wished her well. I made my boundaries clear. That was enough. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench, Clara joined me with 2 cups of coffee. We watched children chase pigeons, laughing at nothing and everything. You seem peaceful, she said. I am, I replied. She smiled. You earned it. As the sun dipped low, I thought about the word victory. I used to imagine it as confrontation, as raised voices, as finally being proven right. But my victory was quieter. It was waking up without fear. It was choosing who had access to my life. It was being heard. By myself most of all. That night, I added another voice message to my phone. Another promise. You didn't lose, I said. You changed. And as I set the phone down and turned off the light, I understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Sometimes, the greatest triumph isn't making them hear you. It's realizing you no longer need to. As winter settled in, the park outside my window changed its voice. The laughter softened, replaced by the hush of falling snow and the distant crunch of boots on frozen paths. I wrapped myself in a knitted shawl and watched the world slow down, feeling oddly grateful for the quiet. Quiet had once been my prison. Now it was my refuge. One morning, I received a call from the community center. They were starting a weekly support circle. Nothing formal, just a space where people could speak freely. They asked if I would help guide it. Guide? I laughed softly. I'm no expert. You're a listener, the woman on the phone said. That's exactly what we need. So every Thursday afternoon, I sat in a circle of mismatched chairs with strangers who quickly became familiar. There was Margaret, who felt invisible after retirement. Daniel, whose adult children spoke around him instead of to him. A young mother caring for her aging father, exhausted and afraid of doing the wrong thing. I didn't get advice unless asked. I didn't interrupt. I simply listened. And something remarkable happened. People straightened in their seats. Their voices grew steadier. Some cried, some laughed in relief. Being heard, truly heard, gave them back pieces of themselves they thought were gone. It reminded me of myself in that hallway. The difference was this time, silence wasn't stealing anything. It was giving. One evening, after a particularly heavy session, I walked home under a sky dusted with stars. I felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from purpose. At home, I found a message from my son. "Mom, I've been offered a job in another city," he said. "I wanted to tell you before anyone else. And I wanted your advice." Advice. The word warmed me more than the heater humming in the corner. We talked for nearly an hour. About fear, about growth, about choosing differently when the same patterns try to pull you back in. I didn't tell him what to do. I asked him questions. The kind that make you listen to yourself. At the end, he said, "I'm proud of you." I closed my eyes and let the words settle, not because I needed his approval, but because it meant he was learning. Spring arrived gently. Buds appeared on the trees like small promises. I planted herbs on my windowsill. Basil, mint, rosemary. Watching them grow felt symbolic. Proof that care and patience still worked, no matter how late you started. One afternoon, Clara and I sat together, clipping leaves for tea. "Do you ever regret not confronting them sooner?" she asked carefully. I considered the question. "Yes," I said finally. "And no." She tilted her head. "How so?" "I regret the years I thought being quiet meant being kind," I said. "But I don't regret the moment I listened, because listening showed me the truth, and truth is what set me free." She smiled. "That sounds like wisdom." I laughed. "It sounds like experience." Later that week, a letter arrived. This one from a law office. My will, updated months ago, was finalized and filed. I reread it slowly. It wasn't about punishment or reward. It was about intention. I had left portions to causes I cared about, to the community center, to a small scholarship fund, to my son, yes, but not without boundaries clearly stated. Love, I had learned, thrives best when it isn't tangled with control. On the last page, I had written a personal note to be read someday. If you're reading this, remember, listen before you decide. Silence can hide pain or truth. Choose which one you honor. I folded the document and placed it back in its envelope, feeling strangely complete. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He was standing in the doorway of the old house, smiling the way he used to when words weren't necessary. "You did well," he said. When I woke, My pillow was damp, but my heart was light. As summer returned, the support circle grew. New faces, new stories. I watched people discover their voices the way I had discovered mine. Not suddenly, but steadily. One Thursday, a young woman stayed behind after everyone left. "My grandmother lives with us," she said quietly. "We talk about her like she's not there." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice gentle. "What do you think she hears?" I asked. She swallowed. "Everything," she replied. I nodded. "Then start there. Sometimes change begins with a single listening ear. Sometimes it begins with realizing someone has been listening all along." On my evening walks, neighbors greeted me by name now. The cafe saved my favorite seat. Life felt woven together in small, meaningful threads. I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me. I was defined by what I chose to build afterward. One sunset, sitting by my window, I played back the voice messages I had recorded over the past year. Each one was a marker, a reminder of growth, of courage, of choosing myself. I added one more. "Listening saved me," I said. "And now, it's how I give back." As darkness settled and the park lights flickered on, I realized something profound. The hallway had been the beginning, not the end. They hadn't known I was listening. But because I was, I found my voice, my boundaries, and my peace. And that, quiet, steady, unshakable, was the legacy I would leave behind. Life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It was a quiet afternoon, late summer again, when I heard a knock at my door. Not the soft, hesitant knock my son used now. This one was firm, certain, the kind that assumes it belongs. I knew before I opened it. My daughter-in-law stood in the hallway. She looked different, tired. The sharp confidence she once wore like armor had dulled around the edges. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Years of unspoken words hung between us, heavy and fragile. "I didn't know if you'd let me in," she said finally. "I didn't know either," I replied truthfully. After a pause, I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She glanced around my apartment, at the light, the plants, the calm. I could almost see the thoughts moving behind her eyes. "You look well," she said. "I am," I answered. She nodded, swallowing hard. "That's why I came." The words surprised me. "I lost my job," she continued, "and your son, he moved for work. We're trying to figure things out." I waited. Listening had taught me patience. "I realized something after he left," she said quietly. "The house feels empty when you treat people like furniture." I felt a small ache in my chest. Not pain, not anger. Recognition. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she added quickly. "I just needed to say I'm sorry. Not the careful kind, the real kind." I studied her face, the woman who once laughed about me in the hallway. The woman who thought silence meant permission. "I hurt you," she said, "because I was afraid of becoming you." The honesty startled me. "Afraid of aging," she went on. "Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being invisible." So I tried to control what scared me. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I spoke. Fear explains behavior, I said gently. It doesn't excuse it. She nodded. Tears slicked free. I know, she whispered. We didn't hug. We didn't reach across the space between us. Some closeness takes time, and some never returns in the same shape. But when she stood to leave, something had shifted. I hope you keep choosing yourself, she said at the door. I will, I replied. I hope you learn to do the same, without hurting others. After she left, I sat in the quiet and breathed. Closure, I learned, isn't always warm. Sometimes it's simply clear. Weeks later, my son came to visit. He told me about his new city, his new routines, the way distance had forced him to look at his life honestly. I didn't realize how much I let other people speak for me, he admitted, including about you. I reached for his hand. You're learning, I said. That's what matters. That evening, we walked through the park together. He slowed his steps to match mine, something he hadn't done in years. Mom, he said suddenly, do you ever wish things had turned out differently? I thought of the hallway, the pain, the awakening. Yes, I said, and no. He smiled sadly. You say that a lot. Because it's true, I replied. I wish you hadn't hurt me, but I don't wish away who I became because of it. He nodded, eyes shining. As autumn arrived, the support circle began to include younger faces, caregivers, overwhelmed and unsure. I watched them wrestle with guilt and love, frustration and fear. One day, a young man spoke through tears. I talk about my mother like she's not in the room, he admitted. I didn't realize how cruel that was until now. The room was silent. She hears you, I said softly, even if she doesn't respond. He covered his face and cried. Moments like that reminded me why I stayed, why I spoke, why listening mattered. Not long after, I received an invitation in the mail. My son's wedding anniversary. He and his wife, still married, still working through things, were hosting a small gathering. There was no pressure, no assumption. I considered it carefully. In the end, I sent a note. I will come for a little while. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when to open. The gathering was quiet, polite, careful. My daughter-in-law met my eyes once, nodded respectfully, and gave me space. That was enough. Before I left, my son hugged me, long and steady. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for understanding, I replied. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window and watched the lights flicker on in the park. Children chased each other. Couples strolled. Life moved forward, indifferent to old pain. And that felt like mercy. I thought about how easily stories could have ended differently. How bitterness could have hardened me. How silence could have swallowed me whole. Instead, I chose something else. Not revenge, not loud justice, but self-respect. I picked up my phone and recorded another message, my voice calm and sure. You don't have to be heard by everyone, I said. Just by the people who matter, and by yourself. I placed the phone down and smiled. The hallway no longer haunted me. It had done its work. Because sometimes the past doesn't return to hurt you again. Sometimes it comes back to show you how far you've come. Home used to mean walls. It meant doors I could close, rooms I could clean, meals I could cook for people I loved. For years, I believed home was something you owned, something you protected by holding on tighter, even when your hands were tired. But as autumn deepened and the air turned crisp, I began to understand something different. Home is not where you are needed. Home is where you are respected. The realization came quietly, the way most truths do when they're finally ready to be heard. One afternoon, I received a letter from the city council. The park across from my apartment was being renovated, and they were asking community members for ideas, memories, suggestions, stories about what the park meant to them. I sat at my small desk for a long time, pen hovering above paper. Then I wrote. I wrote about watching seasons change from my window, about children learning to ride bikes, about elderly couples walking hand in hand, slowly but together, about benches where people sat alone but never truly felt it. I wrote about listening. When I mailed the letter, I felt oddly lighter, as if I had released something I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. Weeks later, I received another envelope, this one handwritten. They had chosen my letter to be displayed on a small plaque near the walking path. Not my name, just the words. This park is a place to rest, to listen, and to remember that every voice matters, especially the quiet ones. The day they installed it, I walked down slowly with my cane. Clara came with me, her arm linked through mine. "That's you," she said, smiling. "No," I replied. "That's everyone." We stood there for a while, watching people pass without knowing the story behind the words. And that was perfect. Stories don't always need owners. That evening, my son called. "I heard about the park," he said. "I'm proud of you." I smiled. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then he asked, carefully, "Do you ever think about the old house?" I did. Sometimes, in flashes. The kitchen window, the hallway, the place where my life quietly split in two. "Yes," I said honestly, "but it doesn't hurt the way it used to." "That house is being sold," he told me. We decided it was time. I closed my eyes and breathed. "Are you okay with that?" he asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. Because that house was no longer my home. It was a chapter, and chapters are meant to end. As winter approached again, the support circle held its last meeting of the year. We shared food, laughter, memories. One by one, people spoke, not of pain this time, but of change. Margaret had started volunteering. Daniel had learned to speak up to his children. The young mother had begun setting boundaries without guilt. When it was my turn, I stood slowly and looked around the circle. I once believed my life was shrinking, I said. But I was wrong. It was refining. They listened. Really listened. I lost a home, I continued, but I found myself. And that turned out to be enough. After the meeting, a teenage girl approached me. She had been sitting quietly in the corner the whole time. My grandmother lives with us, she said shyly. I'm going to start talking to her instead of about her. I placed my hand over hers. That will mean more than you know. That night, snow fell softly outside my window. I wrapped myself in a blanket and replayed old voice messages on my phone, the ones I had recorded over the years. Each one was a step forward. Each one a promise kept. I added another. Home, I said into the phone, is where your voice is safe. In the days that followed, I began sorting through my belongings, not to prepare for an ending, but to honor what I had lived. I gave away books, donated clothes, kept only what felt true. I wasn't letting go because I was fading. I was making room. One afternoon, Clara helped me hang a new photo on the wall. It was of the park at sunset, light spilling across the path, people moving through it like gentle currents. This place suits you, she said. It does, I agreed. It listens back. On the first warm day of spring, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment. Nothing formal, just tea, laughter, and shared silence. My son came. Clara came. A few friends from the center came. There were no speeches, no explanations, just presence. As they left one by one, I stood in the doorway and felt something settle deep inside me. I belonged here. Later that night, alone again, I sat by the window and watched the lights in the park flicker on. I thought about the hallway, the moment that changed everything. The moment I realized I had been listening to the wrong things for too long. I had listened to fear, to obligation, to the belief that love meant endurance. Now, I listened to myself, and that changed the sound of everything. They hadn't known I was listening, but because I was, I learned what home truly means. Not walls, not history, not even family when family forgets how to love. Home is the place where your voice is not questioned. And at last, I was home. Years passed, quietly, like water carving a riverbed. Life continued, not in leaps and dramatic confrontations, but in soft, persistent moments that shaped me into someone I barely recognized. Someone stronger, calmer, and unafraid. The hallway, where I had first listened to my family's betrayal, felt like a lifetime ago, yet its echoes remained etched in me. That night of hearing everything had been a turning point, a spark that ignited a fire I didn't realize I possessed. I often thought about the woman I used to be. Cautious, small, self-effacing. She had been afraid of raising her voice, afraid of standing up, afraid of losing love if she said too much. But life, as it does, had forced me to confront everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and self-worth. Listening in that hallway had awakened something that was always there, buried under years of sacrifice and quiet compliance. One crisp morning, I decided to visit the old house one last time. Not to reclaim it, not to argue or to relive past pain, but to close a chapter that had lingered too long. I wanted to see it with fresh eyes, as someone who had grown beyond fear. The realtor had left the door unlocked for me, knowing I would come. The house smelled the same as it had decades ago, a mix of aged wood, faint perfume, and memories. Walking through each room, I felt the ghosts of my past life. The kitchen where I had prepared countless meals. The living room where my husband had laughed with our children. The hallway, the very one where I had heard everything, felt smaller somehow, diminished by the distance I had traveled in my heart. I paused by the window that overlooked the garden. It was overgrown, wild, yet still beautiful. I traced my fingers along the old wooden sill. For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel loss. I felt gratitude for the lessons, for the resilience I had discovered, for the quiet strength that had grown inside me. Life in my apartment, in contrast, felt full of light and possibility. I had cultivated routines, friendships, and a sense of purpose that no betrayal could ever take from me again. Clara was often at my side, helping me navigate winter evenings and tending to the herbs on the windowsill. The support circle had grown beyond what I ever imagined. People came to share their pain, and I shared mine, not to seek sympathy, but to show them that strength could be gentle, that courage could be quiet. One afternoon, a young woman named Leela approached me after a meeting. She had tears in her eyes and a trembling voice. "I've been living with my grandmother," she said. "I talk about her all the time, like she's not there. But after listening to your story, I realized she's been hearing everything. And I want to change that." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I smiled gently, taking her hand in mine. "Listening is powerful," I said. "Sometimes it saves lives, not just yours, but the ones around you. Start there." That evening, I reflected on how life had shifted. My son had grown into a more thoughtful, self-aware man. He called often, asking for advice, not orders. We walked together in the park, discussing everything from books to memories, without the shadow of resentment. My daughter-in-law's occasional messages were brief, but civil, enough to know that acknowledgement had replaced animosity. I had learned that not every bridge needed to be rebuilt. Some merely needed to be walked past with dignity. Winter melted into spring, and I found myself planting a small garden on my balcony. Basil, rosemary, mint, and even a few bright flowers that reminded me of summers past. Tending to them became meditative. Each new leaf, each bud, was a reminder that growth was possible, even after loss, even after betrayal, even after years of believing I had nothing left to give. One day, a letter arrived unexpectedly. It was from a young man who had attended the support circle months ago. "Your story changed me," he wrote. "I finally started listening to my father instead of speaking over him. I realized silence doesn't mean absence. It can mean understanding. Thank you for teaching me to listen." I folded the letter and held it close to my heart. Strength, I realized, wasn't only the ability to endure. It was the ability to transform, to turn pain into guidance, to make the lessons of betrayal serve not just myself, but others. In my quiet moments, I often thought about the hallway, about that night when I had heard my family plotting behind my back. I had been frightened, small, and hurt beyond words. But that moment had birthed something extraordinary. Awareness. Awareness had grown into resolve, which had grown into independence, which had blossomed into influence, not through loud arguments or public confrontations, but through quiet presence, empathy, and listening. It struck me then that true strength is rarely loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need validation. It is built in silence, in observation, in patience. The hallway had been my proving ground, and I had passed, not by fighting, not by shouting, but by seeing, hearing, and waiting until I was ready to act. Spring deepened, and I hosted a small gathering of friends from the support circle in my apartment. We shared tea, cookies, and laughter, a sound I hadn't heard in years without an edge of pain lurking beneath it. We celebrated growth, shared our victories, small and large. I watched people who had once been timid and frightened stand tall, speak up, and embrace their own strength. Later that evening, as the last guests left and the apartment grew quiet, I stood by the window, looking out over the city. Lights flickered in the distance. Cars moved steadily along the streets. Life moved forward, indifferent yet kind, relentless yet forgiving. I realized that I had finally found my own rhythm, my own home. Not the walls of a house, but the space within myself that could never be taken. I picked up my phone and recorded another voice message, one I would keep for myself. You have endured. You have listened. You have grown. The hallway that once held pain now holds your strength. You are enough. You are worthy. You are heard. I paused, letting the words sink in. For the first time in decades, I felt no fear of silence. No need to overhear. No need to anticipate betrayal. I had built a sanctuary within myself, a home that no one could ever take away. And as I sat back in my chair, the warmth of the late spring sun on my face, I understood fully. The strength I had discovered wasn't just survival. It was triumph. Quiet, steady, enduring triumph. The hallway had taught me one thing above all. People may try to diminish you, ignore you, or betray you. But your awareness, your patience, and your choice to stand firm in your truth, those cannot be stolen. They never could be. And so I lived, not in fear, not in bitterness, but in the quiet certainty of my own strength. Listening had saved me once, and now it guided me every day. I was no longer the woman who trembled in the hallway, afraid to breathe. I was the woman who had survived betrayal, reclaimed her life, and learned that real power lies not in control over others, but in mastery of oneself. And in that mastery, I found something greater than revenge, greater than anger, greater than loss, I found peace. I found freedom. I found myself. And in that discovery, I finally understood what it meant to be truly home.